Good afternoon. My name is Gordon Smith, and I would propose we start now, although we still have one panelist to come. Despite what, none of you can see the clock in front of me, which would indicate that we've got 2 hours here. We don't. We have 1 hour, so we're going to have to move fairly quickly. And what I thought we would do is I'm just going to pose a couple of questions to begin, and then I'm going to ask each panelist first just to say in 30 seconds who they are and what their interest is in this subject, because it's a very interesting cross-cutting subject, obviously. And then secondly, to give their reply to the two questions I will put out and make whatever comments they want. I hope we can keep our comments at this end of the room down to 5 minutes or so, because I really would like to have an exchange with those of you in the room and to really try to engage you all rather than all the talk coming from this end of the room. The first question I hope we will address this afternoon is, you know, the word revelations, the Snowden revelations. That's in the English language. This is a strong word when you talk about revelations. What is it exactly that the leaks from Edward Snowden was so revealing? I'm tempted to start answering the question myself, but I don't want to do that. So what are we talking about when we're talking about something that is a revelation, which is obviously totally something that normally you would think in using that word is absolutely amazing, is sort of off the charts in terms of predictability. At least that's how I would understand that word. So just let's try to be clearer than I think some of the discussion has been as to what revelations we're talking about. And the second thing is, I don't think there's any doubt that I feel it too, that there isn't the trust that was once there. But how is that lessening of trust, unless somebody's going to argue that there really is no lessening of trust, how is the lessening of trust actually playing out? Is it just something some people feel, an unease, or is it something where you know and can describe in terms of use of Facebook data or whatever? But I'd like us also on both questions to be more specific than a lot of the debate has been. So why don't I go to my right, Moez, and let you introduce yourself and comment on my questions and make it what other comments you would like.
Thank you. I'm Moez Chakchouk. I'm from Tunisia. I'm CEO of ITI. ITI is the former Tunisian internet agency, the agency that censored internet during the regime of Ben Ali, and the agency that surveyed for long years the internet in my country. When we deal with trust is an important issue that we are talking about because of that revelation, but it's not just because of that. Because that we, of course, yeah, again. When we deal with trust, that I mean we need to trust each other, and I think that people in this world don't trust each other anymore as before because we lost a lot of values. And this internet, things have become much more complicated and worse. Let's talk about why we need this trust so bad today in my country, for example. Why we need to trust the government now saying that I won't survey my citizens. I won't censor anymore the internet. What's happening? What we had in my country didn't show a lot of change, but at the same time people are thinking that there is a lot of issues that we need to deal with before trusting this government or trusting the state to do such kind of things. And of course this is not helping, because actually when we see in this sphere and these revelations become let my country become much more complicated, because we reveal that powerful countries are now doing a lot of surveillance, and for the reason that because they have the national security issues that we have, they need to deal about them, and also because of the spying issues. But at the same time, when we come to this country and to this government and say we don't need surveillance because we are a country that we need to focus on development, they need to say no. Look to the examples of all developed countries. We need to do the same. So I think this reminds me something very important. we try to have the same weapons as we did before for war, you know. And now for this cyberspace, we become talk much more about the cyber war, and like it's like a Cold War anymore. And not between two powerful countries or two group of powerful countries, but it's much more about all countries in the world. All countries are against each other. And trying to trust each other now, it's become much more difficult because of these reasons. Because if we want to guarantee the security of people and safety and bringing arguments to do some surveillance or to find solution for this cyber criminality and cyber security, we need also to let people trust us. And this is not easy because for different reasons, and the reasons in my country because we are actually in a transitional period. So, and I don't hope that after the election also it will be so trustable, because all people will doubt that there is some people who in the government, they will ask for much more surveillance, and to ask other countries to help them, and to ask the vendors to bring much more technology on surveillance, on censorship. So the issue is also about how to let the government now enhance its trust with people, but it's not just because they are elected that we will not trust them, for sure. We need more actions. We need to show that, for example, we can talk about how they become much more transparent, how they can publish, for example, a transparency report on about all these requests from coming on the cyberspace, and this is one of the issues. So I think transparency is a big important to be dealt with for this panel, and also how to open the dialogue with all the society. We try always to keep these issues on cybersecurity and cybercriminality just as it is only the role of the governments and of the police and so on. But we now know that for the cyberspace we need to be much more open, and we need to find new mechanisms that could involve much more the society on these issues.
Thank you very much, Moez. Chris?
Thanks, and thanks for keying up a couple of the key themes even in your opening remarks that are great. My name is Chris Riley. I work for Mozilla, maker of the popular Firefox browser, in case the numerous stickers of foxes on the back of my laptop don't give it away. It's been our position that there has been a significant and perceptible harm to trust in the past couple of years. You'd have to ask a psychologist why. I'm a recovering engineer and a recovering lawyer, and certainly not particularly qualified to that, but I mean, the sense I have is that the gulf between the perceptions of the degrees of surveillance and the reality as it has been demonstrated was much larger than anyone could have imagined, and we don't even have a full sense today of what that reality is. I don't have a handy cheat sheet to all of the revelations that were put out, but just sort of at the high level, there have been major interception points at border routers collecting vast swaths of internet data as they pass in and out of the United States, programs that collect metadata from phone usage and other communications activity into large databases for uncertain later use. There have been deliberate actions to store and deploy security vulnerabilities against individual targets of intelligence activity, and a broad range of legal mechanisms to take data that was originally collected by private sector interests for business purposes and then use it for law enforcement and surveillance activity, resting on a framework called the third-party doctrine that essentially says you lose your individual right to privacy once you've given private data over to another entity. I put these into three buckets. Buckets for mass surveillance, sort of large-scale gathering of data, whether domestic or international. Targeted surveillance, which again can be domestic or international. Things like using vulnerabilities to try to get into a specific person's computer. And then surveillance by proxy, which is a term I use to characterize taking of data that has already been gathered by other private sector entities and using it for other purposes. I don't think it's really surprising that there's aggressive activity in this space. I mean, the problems of crime and international incidents are very major, and you know, these are legitimate and there are reasons to do these things, but the breadth of what's going on compared to the degree of secrecy that has been maintained about that breadth is what's startling, and I think very understandably so. So for me, and we have seen behavior in response to that. We've seen changes in investment. We've seen changes in individual activities and use of the internet. I think I was at a panel on Tuesday morning specifically looking at localization and at at the responses that have been made, some additive and technical, like trying to lie a new across-Atlantic data cable between Brazil and Africa and Europe, and some that are very potentially harmful, like localization mandates in different countries that really interfere with the global free flow of information. So I think there's a real major harm here, and I think we've seen it, and I think we need to work on fixing it.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's great. Why don't I go next to Carl?
Thank you, Gordon. My name is Carl Fredrik Wedermark. I am from the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, and I work at the Human Rights and International Law section. I also have a terrible cold due to the air conditioning here, so if I'm a little bit short, that's why. I'll just make a brief reflection on the revelation part of the Snowden revelations, and I just wanted to, for a second, perhaps bring back that debate to a national context that we've had in Sweden. Sweden started to draft its intelligence laws already back in 2006, 2007, and this generated a massive national debate. And I would say that for us, that was our time of revelation. We had a couple of propositions from government that were thrown out of government, debated in parliament. Parliamentarians were quitting their jobs. Lawyers were writing amendments, and the original draft for this bill was heavily changed at several occasions, and it was I would say, one of the possibly largest political events of the late 2000s in Sweden. Now, the reason for this was obviously that we were moving from intelligence collection in the ether to intelligence collection in cable, and it was clear already then that this would have consequences for privacy and for people's integrity. So the debate that we saw nationally now, we in some ways are seeing being mirrored in an international scene now, and I think lessons can be drawn from the experiences of countries that have gone through that process of adopting what I would say are very cohesive, one single cohesive law that in very good detail describes the constraints, the abilities, and the trade-offs that exist between the different interests here, and while doing it in a human rights framework. There were obviously a lot of debate at this time as well, about what impact will this have on people's willingness to spread information online. How will it affect, what chilling effects will it have? And this debate led to major changes in this legislation. Among other things, the legislation was, the concept of nationality was removed from the legislation so as to give equal rights to both Swedes and non-Swedes. There was a criteria, a mechanism for redress built into the system, oversight mechanisms, parliamentary court was also enacted, and limitations to government power. For instance, the government in Sweden cannot use the intelligence agencies to target individuals, nor can it use intelligence information in any legal process. So these were very clear and strict limitations that were put into place as a direct result of the very, very vibrant national debate that we had. And as a consequence, I would say that the revelations that we've seen did generate a lot of debate in Sweden about the NSA and about international relations, less so about the Swedish intelligence legislation. In some ways, because of the fact that there is obviously an ongoing political discussion, but at least a broad agreement about the rule of law implementation. Rule of law-based implementation of this intelligence law. And I think that is really the key issue here, now that we're seeing how the focus is being shifted from the countries that were early on adopting these types of legislation, I was involved in the drafting process of this early on in 2008, and I remember that we were taking a lot of heat for this because we were giving, it was easy to give the perception that Sweden was the only country that was doing intelligence collection, whereas in reality we were perhaps one of the few ones that were inscribing it in open and clear legal statutes at an early stage, together with several other countries, I would add. But as noted as well now in the excellent report that I can't remember the name of that was just released now, in the Global Information Society report, something like that, detailing here at the IGF, it is also clear that the issue of global surveillance and how it's being conducted in many different countries has never been more broadly discussed. And I think it is crucial to bring forward these principles of rule of law, of transparency, and for this, I commend, for instance, Sweden is very much welcome the adoption of these of the necessary and proportionate principles as a starting point for that discussion, and we moved onwards ourselves with a number of principles that we should think, basic rule of principles that we think many countries should be able to sign up to. And we also see that other countries, such as the US, is also starting to talk about intelligence collection in terms of principles to be followed. And that is, in fact, a game changer. And looking forward, I mean, it is, in fact, the first time in history that you have intelligence methods being discussed in a matter of establishing international principles for intelligence collection. That has never been done before, and I think it's sometimes easy to also lose track of the fact that is a nascent discussion and it needs to be nurtured and brought forward. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Marilia?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to be here. My name is Marilia Maciel. I am a researcher and the head of the Center for Technology and Society of the Getúlio Vargas Foundation in Brazil, which is a major Brazilian think tank. We work in the fields of intellectual property and access to knowledge, e-democracy, and internet governance and human rights, which is personally my line of research. The first question you asked about the use of the word revelations, I think that we know for a long time that there are mass surveillance going on, and we know about the existence of agencies like the NSA and their counterparts in other countries that have pretty much expanded their powers in secrecy during the Cold War. But these kind of arrangements that exist in several countries, they are anachronic in democratic societies, and this is, maybe the revelations tell us that this is something that needs to be discussed with urgency, because there are fundamental elements missing in how these intelligence policies are being developed by countries, such as transparency, consent, oversight. All these elements are missing. And even though the intelligence community likes to think they are apart from other public policies, intelligence is a kind of a public policy, and it needs to be discussed openly by the public. I think one thing that was a surprise for many of us was the lack of respect for human rights that is being conducted by the state agencies, and the reaction from the US government that tried to differentiate the standards of human rights that apply for US citizens and for non-US citizens, taking into consideration the leading role that the US has played in internet development and the fact that they have set a high moral standards for all. I think that this explanation was pretty surprising for many of us that are not US citizens. Another surprise for some is the depth of the strategy of mass surveillance that encompasses all the different layers of the internet. Some people were aware there was surveillance on platforms, but there is also on softwares, there's also on the telecommunication layers, and all these technologies being put together make it really hard for other countries to try to curb mass surveillance, at least in a short time frame. I think one of the important consequences consequences of these revelations is that the fragmentation of the internet that we have been talking about for a long time, maybe it's now more real than ever as a possibility. Maybe not so much structural fragmentation of the internet, because this would not be in the best interest of the most powerful players around the world. But in my view, there could be fragmentation or at least disaggregation of internet and of internet governance in three different levels. The first of them is on the level of ideas and the ideology that underpins the regime. And this is related to a relative loss of influence of the US government that had the ability before to shape the predominant understandings that we had in internet governance and to make actors coalesce around this understanding. I think that we lack leadership in internet governance. I'm not passing judgment on that. Maybe this is positive for other countries that have tried to exert more influence on internet governance. I think it was clear that Brazil is one of these countries after organizing Net Mundial. But this is something that we need to look into. There is a clear vacuum of leadership in the regime now. The second level where disaggregation could take place is a normative level. There are several attempts to try to localize data and make national laws apply to the data that is stored in different servers. And this may create difficulties and complexities for regulation, creating a mosaic of different regulations that we need to deal with, and creating difficulties for interoperability on the juridical level of operation of internet governance. And I think that the third aspect is that we have a trend of continued institutional disconnection. And this is something we really need to look into, especially the silos that have been bridged between the cyber community, the security community, and the internet governance community. This is really something that we need to be more involved with, the discussions around cybersecurity. Many of us have started to follow up. We have been to London, Seoul, and we are looking forward to being in other meetings, but there are other topics that are being discussed elsewhere that most of us are not very much informed and aware, such as the control of cyber weapons, for instance. And the countries that are part of the Westerner arrangement, they are trying to impose export controls on technologies they have framed as cyber weapons. This has been going on for some time. Hardware and technologies of dual use are controlled since '96, but now they are moving towards some kinds of software that could be used for hacking or softwares of deep packet inspection. And these softwares that are used for hacking, they're being really poorly classified as cyber weapons. There's no established definition, and so there can be an over-inclusion of software that is used by hackers to acquire information as cyber weapons. So this will make it harder for us to continue to have access to information about surveillance that is taking place. So this is just one of the issues that we need to look into. Maybe for us here that are in the Internet Governance Forum and involved in internet governance, one of the best things that we can take from these revelations as a lesson to us is the necessity to bridge these two worlds and as well to listen to the security community. I had the chance to be in an MIT conference before Net Mundial, and we were discussing principles such as necessary and proportionate that I pretty much support. Like you said, they are very important, but the security community has concerns about how they have been framed, and this is something that we need to discuss with them and here in order to reach a common understanding, because the security lobby is really strong inside our countries and we need to move them, to have them in our side as well. So this debate is necessary and these bridges need to be bridged. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. I'll go now to you, please, Carolina.
Hello? Yes. So first, I'm sorry I was a little bit late. We were in the wrong room. There was a guy literally standing in front of the arrow, and there was workshop 7, so we didn't see the arrow. So I brought like 15 people with me that were in the wrong room. But anyway, so my name is Carolina Rossini. I'm originally from Brazil, living in US for a while. I'm the Vice President for International Policy at Public Knowledge, which is a watchdog for media mergers, net neutrality, internet rights, rights and human rights based in Washington, D.C., currently exists for almost 18 years. So I was asked here also as my colleagues to speak about revelations. And I think you guys heard, and we heard a lot in Net Mundial and also in the past IGF in Bali, a lot what the Snowden revelations meant and how much that affected all of us, even at the emotional level. And I also want to talk about how this emotional reaction is actually impacting how we do policy. So revelation actually comes from the word apocalypse. And that's very interesting to understand because it means unveiling. It means a surprisingly, previously unknown fact that actually has a deep has an effect, a deep transformation in how we exist in the world as humans, right? And it's true that Marilia, a lot of people said, we knew about that, but all those folks that knew about that read a lot of science fictions, they were always accused of, this is, how do you say, theory, conspiration theory, or you also believe in aliens and things like that. So they didn't have enough legitimacy to actually work on that. Of course, there were people already work on that. The necessary and proportionate, it started in IGF while I was still there, but I was doing the intellectual property part there. So that actually was built even before Snowden revelations because they already knew something was coming. And actually before revelation, in the Apocalypse book, you actually have these visions, right? So we can say the necessary and proportionate are a vision of upcoming revelation. And this revelation really impacts on us as humans and impacted specifically on Dilma, and I want to enter a little bit in geopolitics of that, because she was personally surveillance. Like Dilma is the president of my home country, and besides understanding that she was personally surveilled, she also saw that besides political and targeted terrorist surveillance, there was actually economical and political surveillance. So she really didn't accept that. You guys may know that she went to the UN and made a very strong speech. She then, after that, canceled a visit to US. That are extremely strong diplomatic acts when in bilaterals, just putting the flag up saying, US, I don't trust you anymore, or I do not trust you for now until you show me something different. And I really like to think of this as the prisoner's dilemma, because actually if you see, okay, now somebody has advantage bigger than the other, and then Brazil has advantage bigger than US. So to build trust, I really think we need to try to establish back the Nash balance in geopolitics internationally, and I think the US announcement of the IANA transition is in that direction. So I was really happy to see that in US public knowledge, we gave a testimony in Congress on how that was important, and also how was that important to balance the geopolitics regarding the International Telecommunications Union and so on. I'm happy to share some of those materials if you're interested. But exactly because Dilma was emotionally affected, when you are emotionally affected, you do take bad decisions, right? You call your boyfriend when you are drunk at 3 a.m., and that's a terrible decision. So she took a strong decision that was...
I like that. I like that.
You like to be called, or do you call?
We'll talk about that later.
So anyway, she took a bad decision and a not informed decision of actually changing the bill of Marco Civil to exactly ask for locally placed servers, and everybody freaked out. You cannot imagine how DC was a pandemonium when that was announced. But it's interesting to say, if you were in the Google tent yesterday, Vincent Cerf was telling us like his conversation with the communication minister of Turkish, and the first thing he said, the guys from Turkish asked, but what did he ask you? And he said, the first thing everybody asks me when I go to the countries is, are you going to install servers here? Are you going to give us jobs? Are you going to make partnerships with our universities? So we have to remember that this server placement is not just, was not a first time thing. You know, it occurs as part of investments of companies in certain states, even more in those states, and Brazil follows this theory of developmentists. I don't know if that's the word in English, but it's a development theory behind that and behind policymakers. So we need to understand these elements to not judge and to not create even more anxiety in the international geopolitics. So on the trust part, and we had a question about that, right? We have different actors coming from different contexts who have different responsibilities. And I think that's very important to understand, to not judge an act from a country without understanding where they are coming from. So that's why I also wanted to bring the Turkish ask for Vincent Cerf. But technology, now let's move, these were all the problems that happen, right? So let's move to some of the solutions of it. Technology can empower arriving on some of this balance. And when I say that, I am asking all of us to really make a binding commitment to transparency and accountability and documentation of what happens, right? Brazil and other countries, US including, we are founders of the Open Government Partnership. There are a series of commitments there. There is a series of implementation in there. And one thing that we should use even more coming from civil society and advocates, how we can use those commitments also in the surveillance side. For example, I also work on trade negotiations, right? And everything on trade is secret. And then I found this beautiful document of USTR, who leads trade negotiations for US, talking about all their commitments in transparency. So I went with that document to STR and said, look, your commitments with transparency. Like, this is really not congruent to how you are acting and what you are promising on this other side. So I ask you, all of you, to really pay attention to different verticals, as they call them, because they can inform each other. Anyway, in Brazil, in Brazil, another consequence of all of this is that now we should not just be thinking about the Marco Civil, right? And if you guys want, I have the English version of the Marco Civil. I translated and folks distributed after the Net Mundial. And we need to regulate that yet. There are three pieces that will come as regulation. One is the net neutrality. This is the IGF of net neutrality, so you guys have probably heard about it already. Data protection, personal data protection, and copyright reform, which actually is going on for 9 years. In data protection, maybe that's where we can find some balance, right? That Nash balance that I was talking about. Ways to find that balance is countries should negotiate what are the limits. If we recognize that human rights are universal, what is the bilateral commitment among countries to put some of those limits? And how to arrive in that agreement in a way that's also informed by society. Brazil just passed 2 or 3 weeks ago, no, a little bit more, a month ago, a law that's called Public Participation Law. So now citizens are empowered, and there are technological-based channels and platforms for citizens to participate directly in lawmaking in Brazil. So that's one way to do it, and because of course I just don't want 2 countries negotiating who can surveil me and how, right? I want to have some input on that. And the other thing is things like informed consent. How can we design a system of informed consent, also informed by all stakeholders, that actually can help rebuild this trust. So these are some alternatives that we are actually also looking into in Brazil, as a lot of you guys are looking in your countries. US is looking on that for health, for consumer data, and things like that. So that's a little my roadmap on how I see these things. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Carolina. And I thought all of the comments have been useful and basically all in the same direction. I'll come back to that in a second. But I'm glad, Carolina, you also pushed the discussion to looking forward and what kinds of things could be done. I'd like now to engage those of you in the room who want to speak, and also to know whether there are people out there in the cyberspace that want to connect with us. We do have a microphone, and I'd ask any of you to speak. I'd be particularly interested if in this crowd, it wouldn't be an easy thing to do, or if there are any contrarians out there who would argue that people shouldn't be as surprised, or on the other hand, or that the impact is being exaggerated. It would be great to have a discussion, but probably most of you have chosen to come to this panel because you're basically of the same view of the people to my left and my right. But anybody directly back there who wants to comment? If not, I can play a little You're gonna play?
I can play a little bit.
Pardon me? You've got someone?
Yeah, I have, hello?
You're on.
Yes, I have two questions from remote participants for the panelists. So the first one, do any panelists think national laws can or should discriminate by nationality, i.e. citizenship, in the protection of the right to privacy? And the second question, I'll give them to you both at once. In what moment do you consider a difference between individual online protection and individual online surveillance?
Question at a time. The first question, is there anybody who wants to argue? Okay, go ahead.
Well, if somebody want to argue against me, but I think there should be no differentiation, right? As I said, human rights are universal, and if we differentiate besides not enforcing human rights, even locally, and citizens that are within a jurisdiction, they are protected by that jurisdiction. I almost cried in the first time that the P Club board met in US. What is the acronym?
P Club,
I know.
Privacy and Civil
The
Liberties.
Privacy and Civil Liberties State Oversight Board in US. Supposedly it's like the ombudsman, the accountability mechanism for the surveillance. Of course, they don't know a lot because everything is secret, but they spent the whole day, it was a whole day conference, and not once they mentioned foreigners, not even those foreigners living in the US like I am a resident, right? So it was incredibly absurd for me to see such a, then I asked one of the judge, a lady that's a judge there, saying, can you please address the foreigners? And she said, oh, I'm sorry, I cannot talk about that. The only person, there was one person from civil society that at one point brought it up, but it's incredible. But anyway, the answer is, they should not. The rights are the same. If they are the country, they should be protected by the same laws, and human rights are universal.
Sure. You want the second question. So in what moment do we consider a difference between individual online protection and individual online surveillance?
That's an interesting, almost philosophical level question. You want to have a crack at that, Moise?
You know, in Tunisia, for example, we have a lot of security issues in the border and in the mountains, a lot of terrorism. And in this field, these arguments are put on the ground just to say, okay, we need much more surveillance. And if we don't survey people, we won't guarantee their safety. And this is kind of things that we can never guarantee the safety of people by just surveying the internet, and this is very, very obvious. But unfortunately, people use these arguments every time to, and especially the government, especially the vendors, also for the equipment, that if you want to guarantee the safety of your people, you need to survey the cyberspace, and this is something that we need to really repair, at least, yeah.
Thank you, Moise. I want to take you up, Chris, that you would play the contrarian role.
So I don't know if this is exactly what you had in mind, but I've had some conversations about this set of issues with others with a different perspective. And one of the messages that I've heard from that is that although trust has been harmed, at the end of the day, it's not going to matter all that much, because when we talk about why trust matters, we talk about it in terms of Europeans building a cloud, localization laws being proposed and in some cases adopted, and people not trusting American technology products because they're too worried about how the government can get data out of them or put backdoors into them. And for my part, I think these are valid, but to play devil's advocate and to stimulate conversation, I have heard from others who believe that this just isn't going to matter because it's a trade-off, right? If people like American products and services enough, they will at some point in time get over the trust problem, and it won't have made any difference. And we've seen a lot of these localization laws be introduced and then shot down in Brazil because people realize it's not a big problem. So, I mean, I don't know. Sorry, what?
No, the law was off.
The law was passed, but corrected. They removed the localization.
Yeah, exactly, but
yeah.
not because they thought that is the trust. They just understood that would not work to avoid surveillance.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's consistent, but no, it's totally fine. So I think basically the open question is basically, yes, there's been harm to trust. Does it matter? And I'm a little worried that these people might be right and that it might not matter, and as a result, we might not get systemic improvements to surveillance practices.
Yeah. Just to add something, if you may. I have some remarks. After the Snowden revelations, we tried to look for some statistics on the usage of the DNS of Google, for example. You know, the famous DNS of Google. And you know, the percentage of the usage was quite increased a lot after the Snowden revelation. So people don't care in my country somehow on those issues. But at the same time, I think what is important to build this trust today is not just a trust between maybe Tunisia or a country versus another. It's a trust between people and the government inside, because we are not in the same position. We are a developing country, and developing country need to build the trust between the different stakeholders in order to build a new internet and a better internet. And this is, I think, the most important issue for us, is how to build a society. That society could be much more effective in the country, and then could trust the government if the government gives the opportunity to this society to make the internet better. I can raise, for example, open Wi-Fi, like a project, like an initiative. Why in developing countries, government always raises the issue of security to not allow communities to build mesh networks and open Wi-Fi networks? This is a question. So they don't trust the society. So why they're asking the society or the community to trust them back?
No, I think the context, which is you've made clear right through your comments, Mo, is understanding the context is important, and your country is in a different place in terms of development than the others. It's important to understand that. Yes, the lady here in the green scarf.
Good afternoon. My name is Nenna. I come from the internet. I would like to speak to those of us who have connections, internet connection, who are here in IGF. When we talk about post-Snowden revelations, I had tweeted that maybe we need a priest here, people talking revelation, vision, prophecy, and all of those things. Huh? All right, now having said that, we're talking about the other 60% of the population that are not online. What we risk is that many people in Africa, when they heard about Snowden, when they heard about America, and they heard about what is happening in their own country, they are now like, maybe we should just forget the whole of the internet thing. So our risk is that those who are not yet online may actually lose trust in the internet itself. And what does it mean? It means that all the talk we are doing, all the investment we want to make into bringing the next 5 billion people online may actually be a waste. That is the threat.
That's a really interesting and important observation, and I thank you for.
Can someone come and take the mic from me?
Somebody can take the mic. Yes, the lady is coming up here, and there was somebody in the back left as I'm looking at the room that wanted to speak, and Samantha will get the microphone to them. So just again, as the last intervenant did, just tell us who you are in 5 to 10 seconds, and please pose your question or make your comment. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Teresa Tafida from Nigeria. You know, talking about the emotional impact of the Snowden revelation, I want to give a personal experience. When I heard it the first time, my reaction was, what? You mean everything about me is being observed by somebody? And that created fear in me. I am now afraid. I'm careful what I write on the internet. I'm careful what I write through the cell phone. And I think that is affecting my freedom of expression, my innovation, because if I feel I'm not safe to communicate certain things, then I feel I'm being, my freedom is being threatened. And that, of course, is bringing the question of trust. I'm afraid I don't trust the internet. Then how do I even contribute to the development of my community or my society, and even the global, the globe generally, when it comes to the use of the internet? Thank you.
Thank you. Those are important observations. I've got a gentleman here in the white shirt about halfway back.
So it's a question for Chris, really. Hi, Chris. It's Pat Walsh from the GSMA. I must say it's great to see Mozilla launching Firefox OS mobile in different countries. And so I have a question. In today's mobile, the devices and the ecosystems underpinning them are architectured for the broadcast and collection of data by default. Some of your key target markets are in the developing world, where rules are not clearly defined in relation to various rights. How is Mozilla approaching this?
That is a very good question, and my answer is probably going to mostly be a deflection, because we view our role as manufacturing the operating system, not as building the phones, not as offering the service plans. We offer the operating system to carrier partners who then sell the phones through the carriers. So, I mean, I think this is something that's on a radar screen, but it's something where we, by virtue of only really manufacturing the operating system for the phone, rely primarily on the open source nature of that phone and on the ultimate right that users of the phone have to look at the code themselves and to understand what goes into it at a level that's greater than other devices. So that's not a complete answer, but it's about as complete of one as I can give from Mozilla's point of view.
Did I see? No? No, I guess not. Other comments out there? Yes, please. No, middle, there.
Thank you. Hello, Sophie Kwasny for the Council of Europe.
Just try to speak into the microphone a bit more.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes? Okay, so first coming back on this, whether it's a revelation or not, how we consider reacting to this news. In Europe, at least, in 2000, 2001, the European Parliament had a report on a system called Echelon at the time. So it was known. There were some investigation carried out by European MPs at the time. Except then there was September 11, and the whole dynamic completely changed. So that has to be underlined, I think. Then I have another question for our Brazilian speakers on the panel. Indeed, your president had a very strong reaction. I think everybody as citizens was pleased. But why don't you have a data protection law adopted yet?
Does anybody want to comment first on something? Okay, sorry. So for Nena and our colleague Nigeria, you said, or Kenya? Okay, so I do think, and I would hope that you also count on your local communities when computers and laptops and one laptop per child and tablets and whatever arrives in those countries, as we have been worrying in Brazil. You also develop some type of training, because computers are not enough. You have to really do some peer training to, so people are conscious on what it means getting on the internet and what you can do besides Facebook. So in Africa, for example, there is a huge, all over Africa. Even projects got a bunch of prize already, projects on open educational resources, right? Those projects, they teach students and teachers and the community on how to develop and engage with educational resources through technology. And by by solidifying this feeling that you also can be an author, you are making people more responsible, I believe, on how they engage with internet and things like that. So if you guys are interested on that, there is a bunch of things on collaboration between Brazil and Africa on that specific thing, actually. On the data stuff, so Marco Civil was not easy. As I said, the copyright reform is ongoing for 9 years. The data protection bill is being developed for at least 3 or 4 years. And Marco Civil, I have to say, it just passed the way it passed because of the Snowden revelations. Everybody knows that. We have been advocating for it forever. There were tons of consolidated versions. And now that the Marco is passed and privacy was recognized as one of the principles, they're gonna have to follow that principle to implement. There was a consolidated version of the data protection before Marco Civil. The current version is not public yet. It seems it's gonna be public around November. So we hope that by then, after the elections, remember that we also have elections in Brazil in October, so everything can move in January, can change. But what I've been hearing is that in November we're going to have a new, and they are really looking into good models of informed consent for consumer data protection. And another thing that happened is that before the Snowden revelations, data protection bill in Brazil was just about companies, and now the bill has two topics. It's actually data protection, citizens in regard to governments and citizens in regard to companies. So it's a much broader bill, and I'm happy that they took time on that to really understand and what could be the design there.
Thank you very much. Maria, please.
Just to complete that, after the Snowden revelations, there was a concern about privacy in Brazil, and some of the provisions of the civil rights framework, they were changed and privacy was reinforced. So the contract with a platform will be void if there is no consent for the use of data for other things. Brazilian privacy rules would apply if one of the terminals are localized in Brazil. And there are other provisions in the civil rights framework that were reinforced. But the purpose of the bill was not privacy, and as Carolina mentioned, we have another privacy and data protection bill that should be sent to Congress next year. It is a good bill. I think that it drives a lot from European law. We have the provision of a data protection authority, which we see with good eyes, but it will be a battle in Congress to approve that. So we also count on the help, assistance, and expertise of those that are more knowledgeable on the field with that. I just would like to make a quick comment about the connection between privacy and freedom of expression, which I think it's a very important one. I think that the Snowden revelations kind of revealed how it is important, this connection, to discuss both things together, because as she said, if we have no expectation for privacy, if we begin choosing the words, then the quality of the public debate will certainly decrease. So this is dangerous not only in terms of respecting human rights, but this is also dangerous in terms of a sustainable democracy. If the cost of becoming a public figure, if the cost of dissent becomes too high, then less and less people will be willing to engage in public debate because they know that all the past issues in their lives are going to be sought and made public, so the cost will be too high. We will have less and less people involved in politics, and the quality of debate will decrease. So it's also important for technology, for democracy. Just to come back to a question from a remote participant regarding the individual online protection and individual online surveillance, I think that what underlies this question is the attempt to find the right balance between both. I think that here in the IGF and in many places that we have been to, we try to find the balance between security and privacy, or freedom and security, as if they were like two curbs of offer and demand that we are trying to cross them and find the balance. And this is a real change on the way that we have understood the relation between freedom and security for many, many years in our tradition as democratic countries. You know, freedom should extend until the fringes where security is located. Security is not trying to find the balance. Security should be in the fringes, is the very limit. When we talk about balance, we already lost a lot in terms of freedom and of liberty, and we need to bear that in mind. How we frame the debate is also very important.
Thank you very much, Marilia. Moez, I'm going to you, and then I've got you in my sights as well, and one more, Carl. So Moez, over to you.
I just want to comment about the importance of the law and the privacy law. And you know, in Tunisia we have a privacy law since 2004, just before the WSIS, and it was used by the Ben Ali regime in order to show that the country respected human rights and so on. But in the implementation issue, it's completely different. And I'm sure now, because we have a very good constitution respecting human rights, this is not enough anymore. We know that we need that people understand what is the meaning of this privacy and how they could protect themselves anyway in this cyberspace. There's a lot of capacity building required in a country, and that's why I raised it before, that it is important to build society and build communities. And these communities can be much more effective than the government in increasing the capacity building in the country.
Okay, thanks, Moyes. Now
Sorry, one question. Is there any way to overcome the security versus privacy illusion?
Okay, well, I'm going to throw that question up there, and I'm sure that will produce some reaction. And I'm glad the question's posed so clearly. Okay, Carl, you're next. Maybe you'll comment on that.
I'll try to comment on many of the issues that were raised. There was a very early question about whether or not human rights, whether nationality should be an issue when it comes to human rights. I mentioned that earlier from a Swedish perspective. That is not the case for our legislation. It does treat everyone equally. That is for us a key point in these types of legislation. I also wanted to pick up on the comment made about the dangerous path of using the balancing rhetoric, or from our view, the security. States do have legitimate security concerns, and we do recognize the right for countries, including our own, to have intelligence agencies and intelligence collection to defend against external threats, and that is a fact and will remain so. But that activity must be taking place within the human rights framework. That is a very clear. There's no balancing of rights versus non-rights. I also wanted to pick up on Nenna's comment, which I think was excellent. I think it is clear that countries that have moved on these issues and have given thought to these issues do need to obviously take a lead as much as is possible, because we are seeing a situation where many developing countries, low and middle income countries, are in a very formative stage of very fast development, and the institutions that are put into place now will probably remain for a considerable amount of time, and that is why the discussions, for instance, on certain conventions, regional conventions, African Union Convention, and these issues are very, very important to look at and follow closely, because if the human rights aspects are not treated right from the beginning, it's very hard to change afterwards. And just briefly, also touching on Chris's comments earlier about as long as people like American products, I'll take a more positive note than that, and I will say that the Snowden revelations have indeed unleashed a massive wave of privacy-related initiatives and thought, and I recognize that. From even going from a very technical level at the IETF to a very high policy level internationally, and through several national initiatives. For instance, Sweden has a national parliamentary committee for personal integrity that will be reporting in 2016. These issues have been put on the table, and I also note that, as the lady from Nigeria mentioned, I think the overarching what we really have had as a consequence here is a more public awareness of the fact that the internet per se is not very secure. I mean, there was possibly, especially among new users, an illusion that their data could not be listened to and could not be read by anyone else. But I think this really shows how the chain from devices to cloud storage, just mentioning the much publicized iCloud leak happening a few days ago, really shows how much that notion has to change and how much technology needs to adapt to this new landscape. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. Lady here.
Hi, thank you. It's a great panel, so thank you very much for the great conversations. This is Burcu Bakiolu representing IRP Coalition. I would like to, I guess, introduce the idea, and it's not my idea, that privacy is not a zero-sum model. And Helen Nissenbaum did great work on privacy and context. So, our expectations we have different privacy expectations in different contexts, right? We expect our data to flow in a certain way when we're on Facebook, as opposed to our healthcare provider, for example. We expect the doctors to share certain kind of information that we wouldn't expect in Facebook. So it is when that expected data flow is intercepted or is rerouted, then these privacy issues surface. So with the Snowden revelation, this is exactly what happened. We weren't expecting the data flow to be that way, and that was kind of exposed. So, I mean, I don't know how this would add add to your conversations here, but I just want to kind of insert that.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Unfortunately, our hour is up. I don't know how we only ended up with an hour, and others got an hour and a half, but we'll take that up with the management later on. And we've had a terrific panel. You're right. I agree with you. I've certainly learned a lot. I think we're all kind of see the world in more or less the same way. It would be interesting to have, because I do agree with the comment that there's no question of balancing rights. It's a right or it isn't a right. You've got, and I think the way Carl put that was at least would be something that I would share. In any event, thank you all very much for coming, and I'd ask you to express your appreciation to those who have done all the work to my left and right. Thank you.
Thank you.